Welcome back, everybody. How was lunch? It was good? Y'all liked it? Awesome, 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 awesome. I want to get right into it because you know we're a little bit on CPT time. We're going to try to course correct, right? So I want to kick off this afternoon with our second panel of the day, the continuation of the Black Home, that will be moderated by the illustrious Dana McKinney.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel. Hopefully you guys are well fed and not too sleepy. So it's the panel which is called The Continuation of the Black Home, which is really going to be looking towards how we think about the Black home as it relates to the communities that surround it, the communities that it is embedded in. I want us to think about our neighborhoods, our streets, our blocks, the sociocultural backgrounds at which uphold the Black home, the economics, the policy, all these different social systems, networks, the people. Today, I'm joined here by three amazing people who have been thought leaders in this space. They're designers, they're practitioners, they are shapeshifters in ways. I'm going to start by introducing Wyking Garrett. Recognized by the Seattle Times as one of the 13 most influential people of the decade shaping the region, Wyking Garrett is a third-generation community builder, social entrepreneur, and current president and CEO of Africatown Community Land Trust in Seattle, Washington. Wyking has successfully designed programs and initiatives that inspire, mobilize, and activate communities for sustainable social impact. He has also been a co-catalyst for a number of ventures, including the Africatown Seattle Community Development Initiative, Liberty Bank Building, Umoja Peace Center, Hack the CD, Black Dot, Umoja Fest, Africatown Center for Education Innovation, the Williams Growth Center, and King County Equity Now. Woo. Wyking was an inaugural member of the Seattle Music Commission and a past fellow with the national advocacy organization Green for All. He's been honored with the Center for Ethical Leadership Legacy Leadership Award, Tabor 100 Crystal Eagle Award, and recognized as one of Seattle Magazine's most influential people. Joining us in the middle, we have Tura Cousins-Wilson. Born in Toronto, Ontario, Tura Cousins-Wilson is inspired by creating uplifting spaces of beauty. He contends that architecture's power lies in its ability to transform collective imaginations and narratives into reality. Tura is a licensed architect, both in Ontario and the Netherlands, and has over 12 years of professional experience spanning a variety of scales, including multi-unit residential, large-scale mixed-use developments, libraries, community centers, and urban design. He is a co-founder and principal of SOCA, an emerging practice that applies a global lens to inform how culture and the environment influence inclusionary design. Founded in 2018 on the belief that architecture both shapes and is shaped by contemporary condition, the studio is deeply engaged in research and broader discourse of architects' impact on culture, the environment, and urbanity. Recently has been working with community groups in Toronto's Little Jamaica neighborhood to address the impacts of LRT construction. For those who don't know, that's light rapid transit, economic development, COVID-19, and cultural identity. This work includes the planning and facilitation of community consultation sessions with local business owners and residents, and culminating in a report outlining guidelines and an urban design vision for Little Jamaica. Tura is also a founding member of BETA, Black Architects and Interior Designers Association in Canada, and currently teaches at the University of Toronto. Last but not least, we have Jerome Haferd, who is a licensed architect, public artist, and educator based in Harlem, New York City. He's a principal of the award-winning firm Jerome Haferd Studio and co-founder of Brant Haferd Architecture. Haferd is an assistant professor of I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
Haferd. Ouch, my bad. I'm so sorry. Haferd, is assistant I'm sorry, I know Haferd. I'm so sorry. Haferd is an assistant professor of architecture at City College's Spitzer School of Architecture, where beginning in 2023, he was the co-director of the New Place Memory and Cultural Incubator. Jerome's practice critically engages built environment projects in both urban and rural contexts, often looking to marginalized histories to unlock a new imaginary for architecture, design, and cultural infrastructure. His work on complex sites, including collaborations with the Harlem Africa Burial Ground, Roots to Sky Collective, the Park Avenue Armory, and the National Black Theater. He is lead architect and installation designer for the 2023-2024 Culture, Creativity, and Care Initiative with the Mellon Foundation and Harlem Grown. The studio is one of the first prize recipients for the International Africatown Design Competition in Mobile, Alabama, which I should clarify is a different Africatown than Wyking's over here in Seattle. So thank you, and please welcome all three of our esteemed panelists. So, I wanted to start by asking all of you to talk a little bit about the three places that you are now operating as a place of home, and how those places reflect a larger community and the values of those spaces. So, and we have Africatown, Seattle, we have Little Jamaica, and Harlem, New York City.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good to see everyone. The Central District neighborhood, which is belovedly our Africatown in Seattle, has been home to Black people for a little over 140 years. It was settled and has, at peak was, I think, about 80 to 90% Black, and as Seattle has become a major tech city, and we've experienced a great amount of gentrification, displacement, which are pushing the numbers towards 10% Black. So I think, I grew up third generation. My grandparents came around World War II, wartime economy, and many others settled there coming out of the South, primarily Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, and really brought that to the community. So they established, in a sense, what was home there and brought that there. You have many families who settled. One person would come and then they would call their brother or their sister, and then the family would kind of settle a neighborhood. So you kind of had these compounds in many ways of relationships, which is interesting because it's very similar. When I went to Ghana, I kind of saw the similar thing where people coming into the city from rural areas establish these compounds in the same way. So that made for a very relational community. You had, institutions such as churches that often reflected kind of the settlement of different, families and affinity groups. So it was a very close-knit community, very large homeowner population. I think it was over 50%. And so it was a rich Black enclave for a few generations. I think maybe about 50, 60 years. And a lot of change is happening now. Our work is at the center of preserving and, building, acquiring, developing land to bring folks back or allow people to stay. And it's interesting because, as the displacement has happened, and Dr. Mindy Fullilove speaks about the root shock, there's a lot of trauma also associated where some people don't even want to come back, or they'll come back and they'll, people are moved to tears because of maybe even the way that their childhood home or grandparents' home, how that left the family, right? And so it's very interesting that we have to be intentional about not just building buildings, but also thinking about the experiences that actually do reconnect people to community. Sometimes, art is not explicit, but sometimes to make sure that the message is received, we do have to be explicit in some of the artistic representations and designs so that people can kind of have that connection with the community. So I hope that, provides some context for what's happening on the ground in Africatown, Seattle.
Yeah, I'll speak a bit about Little Jamaica in Toronto. Those of you who aren't familiar, so called Little Jamaica, but it's, a West Indian community, West African community, it's a black community in Toronto that's, seen sort of hit, I call it a triple whammy. So it's over the last few decades have gone through just, general gentrification, displacement that you've seen in a lot of neighborhoods. More recently, and by recently I mean the last 10, 12 years, it's gone through sort of a rapid amount of displacement as a result of a new transit line that you were mentioning in the introduction, which has caused a lot of displacement, disruption, a lot of things that aren't necessarily, architectural. So it might be, closing the street for parking. And, as a neighborhood gentrifies, it means more of the community is living outside the neighborhood. So if they're coming back, then, they're either coming by transit, which is under construction, or by car. And then, construction debris, a lack of walkability in a neighborhood, kind of a lot of, basic urban sort of characteristics that make a good, vibrant street. And then more recently, COVID-19. And it's a neighborhood that, I'm familiar with, I grew up in. It's a pretty broad area, so it's just outside of Toronto's core. And it's one of many West Indian communities in Toronto, so it's, there's quite a few, but it's definitely the largest in Toronto, in Canada, but also even in sort of the kind of the Jamaican diaspora of Miami, New York, London, and sort of developed in the 60s, 70s as a place of opportunities, a place where people could get cheap rent to start businesses, and many of them are still there, evolved from record shops to music stores to barber shops, restaurants, and of the works of what makes a community. And we've been doing a lot of work, largely led by community groups, and we've been assisting on that, which led from just speaking to business owners, speaking to residents of what's been happening. Because I think taking it from a ground up approach, which we'll get into in a little bit.
This is on. Okay, this is on. What was the question?
Well, I was wondering a little bit about Harlem.
Okay.
And your relationship to Harlem,
yeah.
Harlem's relationship with the homes or within it, the community more broadly.
Yeah, so I live in Harlem, which really needs no introduction. Do we have New York, any Harlem people? Woohoo! No Chicago people on this panel. Though my mom did go to the University of Chicago, so shout out. I've lived in Harlem for about a decade. I've lived there the entire time in a brownstone on 127th Street and 5th. It's down the street from the Langston Hughes house, where Langston Hughes lived in the later part of his life and his artistic production. The home that I live in, when I moved in there with my partner in 2013, was and still is an intergenerational space. It's a Jamaican family who lived there and had 3 different generations in the home. So the triplets who lived upstairs, who were I think 9 when we moved in, are now off to college. So I've sort of watched them grow up. And the owner, Arnold, recently passed away. So it's been interesting to see how even just that building has sort of evolved and changed. So I've been in Harlem for 10 years, but am also an outsider. I feel very much part of the community, and yet having grown up in the Midwest in Akron, Ohio, is originally where I'm from. Anybody from Akron in here? Columbus, Cleveland. Okay, Cleveland. That's close enough. Cincinnati, Yes. I think sort of connecting back to the previous panel, and maybe this will be a conversation, I think what's interesting about being a child, a product of the Great Migration as well. My father is from rural Georgia and moved to Akron in the 50s, 40s actually. I think Harlem is one of those places where you have the meeting point of the Great Migration and also the African diaspora and Afro-Caribbean immigrant diaspora. So it's a really interesting space in that regard in terms of an urban environment. And so my relationship to the community has been really accelerated by not only the fact that I have my studio space, and now teach at City College, have taught at Columbia as well, all within a kind of walking distance over the last decade. But my practice has been deeply sort of enmeshed in the local ecosystem of culture makers, of community organizations, and the public spaces in Harlem. One could spend their life in Harlem and only know 10% of it, 5% of it, but that's really what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
Thanks. I know we have a lot of practitioners in the room who are probably wondering what are sort of the tangible things they can bring back into their own practices and in their own respective parts of the country and the world. What tools or techniques do you guys use in your own practice, in your own communities, to help ensure that there's resiliency within Black homes in the Black community? I know some of you mentioned things like gentrification, displacement, infrastructural improvements, also public health, and those are all leading to different types of pressures within Black homes and Black communities. What are the tools that you guys use and that you have found effective in combating those pressures?
I'll jump in. So I think, speaking with Little Jamaica, even some of our other projects, you might see some in the slides. So Little Jamaica, for example, the work that we've been doing, we did a community report. It wasn't a traditional project. It was, a project that community members made. There's a group, Black Urbanism Toronto. Make a shout out to them. They've really kind of out of, interest of, maintaining the community. So it wasn't, the city of Toronto created an RFP to do some urban design for a community or engagement. It was community members coming together and saying, we're seeing kind of the destruction of our neighborhood and community. What can we do about this? And it started with really speaking to residents, and sometimes a bit of kind of confrontational situations with residents of people complaining, people upset with their situation, and starting from sort of a grassroots approach that it wasn't a project in the traditional sense when we started working on it, and I think even thinking another project. It's going to be on the next slide. Working with community organizations that have a really do-it-yourself attitude, where they created culture space, music venue, event space, but it was really, self-directed for many years before, people in, city bureaucracy kind of caught on. It's the project on the left there, on Queen Street West, if you're familiar in that neighborhood in Toronto. And we worked with them in, helping them facilitate a space for different events, for culture, gallery spaces. But it was, again, it wasn't something, it was led by really a community guys. In this case, it was two guys with a focus on supporting, Black artists, Black musicians, particularly after COVID, when you saw a loss of a lot of venues in the city, which I'm sure is familiar with a lot of cities. And I think that's a critical thing. I think, our projects, this project here is, I kind of took over my grandmother's house and was an interpretation of her house, but really then, a self-directed project. And I think what we've come to learn, and it's a different approach, is, in self-direction. It's very about working with communities who might not have the means financially to, say, hire an architect, or you're going for grant funding. So there's a longer process and in how it evolves, and I think that's a critical difference in a lot of the work in communities, especially in Black communities that we're working with.
Well, you just described our process pretty much. So definitely come from a grassroots community building approach. And one of the things is that when we looked at the Seattle 2035 plan, which is the comprehensive plan for the city, part of the Growth Management Act for the state, we didn't see ourselves, we didn't see the community that we knew in the future of the city. So, it's like, who's the first person that dies in the movie? I remember Q-Tip and Poetic Justice. So we just, our response to that was to start basically take that plan, put it to the side, in a sense, tear that script up and begin writing our own script. So we established our own planning process, which was Black Seattle 2035, visions for the future. And that was at the same time they were kind of updating or advancing the Seattle 2035 plan. And so we kind of, in many ways, disrupted that process and was like, nah, we here, we've been here, we're gonna be here. And part of that process was making the planning process more accessible to our community. So, I'm from the hip hop generation. I grew up in the 80s, so the cipher, right, is something. I'm a 5% as well. So the concept of the cipher being a forum which no one is above each other, often in the planning processes you have the city planners, you have architects, you have people using language, again, that's not accessible, and it's like the big I, the little u, it's intimidating, it's unapproachable for a lot of people that may not have that planning or architectural design background. So we started to have our design ciphers, Africatown design ciphers that really put the community first, plugging in the spaces that the community already existed rather than bringing the community to foreign spaces. And out of that, we began to capture the stories and the aspirations of the community. And something else that was valuable was being able to connect with Black architects, urban planners. We created our own Africatown Planning and Design Committee where Black professionals who were working, came and contributed some of their time to help, again, translate community legacy, history, cultural capital, aspirations into the language of kind of the planning process. So that was very helpful, as well as partnering with the University of Washington studios led by Dr. Sharon Sutton, who was at the University of Washington at that time, begin to give some visual expression, again, to the ideas and the aspirations of the community, which really made the future that we were envisioning more tangible and something that people became more inspired by. So, in terms of tools or processes, I definitely think, establishing community-led, community-based processes. I think engaging with Black design professionals, even students, right, in conjunction with, longtime community members, community organizers, and then providing formats. We had a whole Paint the Block party where we did an activation that represented the ideas that had come out of the planning session. So it's also, what can you do now, or what can you lift up now that is representative of the future that you want to see, that brings forward the familiarity, that makes something feels like home, that brings forward the relationships that people have had and developed into the future into spaces that will be developed or preserved in those spaces. So those are some strategies that we've used effectively to advance our work.
This is the benefit of you two going, because then you say everything that would.
I'll start with you next.
I would say. I think the two of you and probably the three of you maybe have a little bit more experience, maybe developing, like, I guess you're saying a toolkit or something per se. But just to add a couple things to that, I think just maybe more abstract things. I think just being around is a tool. I think indeed for those of us who teach, creative ways that students who are young people in the community, often in my case, is a huge, I think, I don't want to say tool, but it's part of the toolkit. Not being afraid to try something and improvise. I think, designers, architects, we are often maybe in a little bit of a liminal space in terms of our role in a sort of community, even if we're also members of that community. So I think I often find that design and the kind of design process and the sort of imaginative implication of that becomes this kind of improv exercise that I think can build bridges between maybe more entrenched community actors and sort of loosen up the space. What else? Yeah, just not being pretentious, not being afraid to get your hands dirty and make mistakes and be accountable. Is that answering your question?
That answers, but I do have a follow-up for you, I think, specifically, and then maybe Tura as well. I mean, you guys teach. I also teach as well, and one of the things that I often struggle with and think a lot about is when we're talking about BIPOC communities and Black communities and Black homes in particular, how are you bridging the gap with your students who may not have any learned or lived experience in those communities and the community themselves? I mean, you've had to do this quite a number of times, right?
Yeah, I will start since you guys have been. All right. Two parts to that. I think in this case, I'm relatively fortunate in that I teach at City College, which is probably the most diverse school of architecture around, one of the. But I think even in a less diverse school, my pedagogy has gravitated to centering a student's, an individual's own lived experience as extremely relevant and valid, and not something that they should check at the door when they walk into this institution or these institutions, right? Which, frankly, I think the built environment disciplines, I can speak for architecture and maybe a few of the other close ones. Structurally, that has not been the case. I think there's this sense that we sort of we enter into this enlightened discipline, which is supposedly this neutral set of canonic tools or canonic methods and identities to then replicate. And I know when I entered into architecture school, I certainly maybe subconsciously did not assume that my own experience was kind of valid or valuable to this new endeavor. So I think just right off the bat, centering and celebrating a student's background, their lived experience as sort of specific and extremely valuable and generative.
Yeah, I'll add, I think an approach, teaching a seminar course and then a few courses at Waterloo, I think, getting students to not see Blackness or communities outside their own as fully as an other, that, there's a lot of parallels, there's a lot of things that, an outsider can bring to the table, even for a Black community. There might be similar struggles, similar lived experiences that people have. One thing with Little Jamaica is the community has been partnering with, Chinatown in Toronto is working on a community land trust. A lot of similar issues of displacement, gentrification, and change in a neighborhood that, you know, isn't necessarily specific just to a Black community. So I think getting students to understand that there's parallels, and also, I think we were just talking about this, and I think a critical thing is that, you know, thinking of, you know, Black communities, and I think this gets into kind of the future spaces is, you know, no, it's not like Little Jamaica is part of the Toronto fabric, it's part of the Canadian fabric in the same way Harlem is to New York, and it's not, it is America, and I think that's a critical thing. And I think so getting, you know, students to, you know, we're doing a seminar right now, and it's largely based on, you know, observation, analysis, walking tours, analytical research, and it's about sort of, you know, a way of seeing, a way of observing spaces that, you know, might not be, you know, you might be kind of an adjacent home to you and not, you know, your immediate home. And I think that's critical, but I think it's just critical just as a designer. You know, we're often like, and again, I think it's critical too, is like we're not just designing, you know, spaces for Black people or just the Jamaican community, which is, you know, our community. You know, we're designing for different types of communities, so like, you know, similar approaches to how you observe, how you ask questions, who you're asking questions to, who's at the table is relatable regardless of the project.
Well, one thing two of you guys have mentioned is how Harlem and Little Jamaica are like embedded within, or like really kind of concentrated communities embedded within larger cities. But Wyking, when you've described Central District, you're talking a bit more about like the dissolution of a Black community. And during lunch, we had a conversation about how a lot of Seattle's historically Black community members have been displaced to the suburbs. How do you position your work, and then how do you continue to think about the upholding of Black community when people are being separated and disaggregated?
That's a great question, and I do want to just highlight the point Tura just made about, you know, really starting from and I think this is important, like starting from an asset and strength-based perspective and not from a deficit perspective. You know, we have so much and we've given so much, and so much has been extracted from our spaces, starting with our bodies, you know, our minds, and just the physical spaces that we exist in have given a lot to this society and to the world, you know, time forever, right? So that's a good place to start, and then, you know, really creating space for imagination, as, you know, many times we're getting in where we're fitting in, we're taking what is allocated or what is left over, and then we're applying our essence, as they call soul music, soul food, and making something out of it. So what does it mean to just start from a place of, hey, we want to make something that works for us? So I think that's an important strategy as well. To the point about the community being, you know, displaced, or the population, I wouldn't say the community has been displaced, the population has been displaced. And, you know, because it hasn't been with an intent of we're going to a new place, how do we make this new place work for us? It's really more like, you know, continuous refugee process, being displaced from one reservation that was established for us and now is desired or has value to someone else again. And so now we're being scattered to the winds and pitching a tent wherever we can afford rent or a mortgage, right? And that doesn't really make for community, establishing community. It's more of a survival state, right? And so for us, you know, even when we looked at, you know, the Chinatown International District in Seattle, you know, the Pan-Asian community, Chinese community, Japan, you know, Vietnamese, Filipino, they don't all live in that community. And it's actually very few families that live in the community, but it's still the cultural and economic hub of the Pan-Asian community in the area. So, you know, we don't expect that everyone that has moved, and no one has to stay anywhere, right? But there should be, you know, a root, right? And you should be connected to your root. And so for us, it's about maintaining that hub Also creating place and space for people to come back to or to stay in, but also just making sure experiences that happen, such as, festivals and gatherings that happen in the community, continue to have space to happen, and bringing new ones, right? Making space for arts and culture and celebration to happen. And so, in the process, it is also saying, we've been a part of the city, and we should be a part of the future of the city. What does that look like? Because in the initial stage, it looked like housing covenants, restrictive housing covenants that only allowed us to live in this community, which is a very valuable community. It's close to downtown, it's close to the water, it's close to a lot of things. So it's geographically, it's just valuable. It was only devalued because we were there, right? And so, with the population being dispersed, I think what we're doing to establish or maintain or facilitate community continuity in the neighborhood also creates models for community be developed in the places that we're resettling, being either whether, being pushed to or whatever, because again, the population has been kind of displaced or relocated, but the community has not yet. So what does it look like? Again, just as when our community migrated from the South, they basically established kind of the community that they had, the institutions that they had, the relationships that they had in this new place. But now that's not happening as much as we're, pushed into the suburbs and whatnot. And so creating some models for how people actually establish, these branches of the tree, as well as, preserve the tree roots at the same time is kind of what we're grappling with. So, everything from how do we build affordable housing, how do we facilitate businesses being started, being established, community events, right? Like being able to take those models and then replicate them, sometimes on a smaller scale in the new variety of places where we're at.
Yeah, I think, Wyking, what you're talking about is so important and a huge conversation. And even though, again, I'm probably the least real estate savvy person on the panel. But, this is back to the previous conversation, why, for example, it's so critical to actually teach history, actual history, in school, including in architecture or built environment disciplines, because in doing so, we review the tyranny of property and of real estate and the systematic dispossession that also happened with events like the Great Migration, which is really, in a way, not even in the past, it's kind of ongoing. So in understanding sort of how we got here, then I think someone doing work like you, or even like the others at this conference, but I think in particular when we start talking about land trusts, but also about how to establish sovereignty in other maybe softer ways through sort of memory and civic expression as also a kind of communal asset. But I think I know you keep talking about how the move to the sort of the suburbs, the sort of black sort of fragmentation to the suburbs, you're kind of bemoaning that fact. But I start to think about, okay, well, what does it look like to maintain ownership, stewardship, and sovereignty, even in that context, right? The previous panel, we were talking about the rates of home ownership. And then we could talk about Africatown Mobile as well. But I think this issue of the sort of, we're in the wake of a kind of multi-layered systemic process of dispossession, and how do we imagine new ways to sort of preserve sovereignty?
Go ahead.
Quickly.
Yeah.
Not to get too heavy.
Go ahead, Tura. And then we're going to go to floor Q&A afterwards, but go ahead.
So I think to add to that, because actually in a lecture, a previous lecture, faced pushback from someone saying, seen it before, communities change. Why can't Harlem change, or why can't Little Jamaica change? I think one critical thing from my perspective is, who has autonomy in that change. So there's communities that, immigrant communities, like great kind of American dream, Canadian dream stories where, a community immigrates and, by and large, over the span of a generation or two or less, a community becomes, wealthier, more integrated into a society, and they move to the suburbs. And in, the Toronto story, there's like great examples of, middle class Black families moving to the suburbs, but there's also examples where, displacement is, forced upon people. So I think that's a really critical element. And, another, to that point, another question that, we've been, asking is, and it's largely with, approaches to zoning is, not just, preserving and, maintaining a specific Little Jamaica, but allowing for new Little Jamaicas to occur. And, especially thinking of just, demographic changes. Again, this starts to get into like real estate and land value, like the cost of buying a building in 1960 Little Jamaica we're never gonna go back to that. Community organizations can do as much as that. Little Jamaica wasn't created by a report or, tons of community activism. It was the spirits of, entrepreneurship, people looking for opportunities. And I think some of the stuff that we've been questioning is, how can we allow that from, an urban design perspective, from zoning, allowing for different types of uses where, new immigrants, new communities are going. So it's not in part, it's too, there's, I think, a celebration too of where people are going and allowing for more opportunities in those locations for new opportunities to occur, as well as, fighting and sort of resisting some of the change in, older Black neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. You have follow-up?
Well, I think it's important to just acknowledge that, there's this phenomenal, things change, and it's just a natural process, but this is a very disorienting, forced migration that we've been experiencing over and over again. And there is a value to permanency. I mean, there's a reason why Harvard has a significance, right? And one of those is that it's one of the oldest universities, if not the oldest in the country, right? Imagine every 50 years, everything just gets moved somewhere else, right? It's not going to have the same level of social capital, political capital, cultural influence. And so if you're starting over, every 30 to 40 years, that is a disruption of generational wealth as well, outside of just the intangible aspects of that. So that's very, I think it's significant to understand the larger implications of these things as well. I mean, gerrymandering is a part of the process and diluting Black political power. And, the reality is we are in a socially engineered environment. So I think it's important for us, to your point, Tura, to begin to really think about socially engineering environments that, work for us. And this is why I think this room is very, very important, as, again, I can not underscore the significance that Black architects, urban planners, and designers have played in enabling us to, again, cement and begin to forge a future for ourselves in our historic community where we've been.
Awesome. Well said. Does anyone in the audience have any questions you want to ask the panelist? Otherwise, I have like 15 more, but okay. I think we have one over here. Huh?
That's great.
Thank you. Hi. I'm really interested to hear more about the aesthetics of gentrification and the style associated with that. I live in Bed-Stuy, which is obviously a gentrifying neighborhood, and at least in my block association, have seen a lot of pushback against evolving the architectural style of the neighborhood. And so I was wondering, in your work, if you've heard similar things from your communities, and what your opinion is on historic preservation in general, and if you think there's room to evolve the architectural style of gentrifying neighborhoods, or are you more committed to preserving what's already there?
Well, I can just jump in real quick. For us, part of our work is about also reflecting ourselves in the built environment, if you see some of the images. So again, we got in where we fit in or where we were allowed. You know, a lot of our communities, like there was a strong Jewish community, so a lot of black churches are in former synagogues, which were designed to facilitate somebody's cultural values, existence, and reflect that, right? So what does it mean now for us to, how the Biggie said, you know, hanging pictures on the wall, you know, every Saturday, right? So just thinking about how we, you know, we do change our environments, but I think because the change in environment means it's no longer our environment is why people are resistant to the change. But, you know, most people, they buy new cars, they buy new clothes, they buy new furniture. You know, black people in their furniture sets is a real thing, right? Like, you know, so if we can think about, we just haven't had the agency over the built environment in that same way. And so our work is about how do we allow the same way we change our styles and fashion and how we, you know, modify things to reflect us, how can we make the built environment, you know, how can we do that in a built environment as well? So we are bringing it forward, black aesthetics, Afrocentric aesthetics in the design that we put forth. And it's a new muscle for our community to reactivate or rebuild because we've been separated from that agency for a significant amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, and it's funny, I think a fair amount of us, maybe including myself, have found myself wading into historic preservation. Like, I never would have thought that I would sort of engage that discourse. But, you know, if we think about Afrofuturism as in that it could be defined as what would we build with our reparations, for example, or what would we build if we had the resources in the first place to shape the built environment? Would it be different? Would it be better? Would it be worse? All of the above. So, you know, something like, there's a few images of the Sankofa installation that my practice finished in Harlem, which I think try to address that question a little bit and sort of explore a kind of ethics and a sort of ritualism, spatial ritual that happens when we begin to maybe engage a kind of imaginary of in ancestral domestic space, but also kind of Afrofuturist space at the same time, to kind of directly address your question, you know, when we were developing the aesthetics of that installation with community members, it was really challenging as a kind of up-and-coming, young architecture office who do installations all over. It was challenging to the prevailing aesthetics of installations, of public installations in cities like New York, which tend to kind of invoke a sort of minimalism, a kind of modernism, a kind of genericism. And it was like, no, we don't want that. How is this going to be a space that belongs in Harlem, belongs in this case, Marcus Garvey Park? And that could be any number of things. But we looked simultaneously at a kind of speculative Afrofuturism, if you will, but also looked at indigenous housing, right? Domestic spaces, Senegalese indigenous housing, and thought about how do you produce and kind of remember or relearn a different sort of way of being in the public environment that could be construed as domestic. Right? Yeah, just from an aesthetic point of view.
To add, yeah, really great points. Just to add to that, I think, you know, some things that we've been talking about, you know, is, you know, what do we mean, say, when we're talking about heritage preservation? You know, often it's, you know, a certain architectural style or, you know, an ornament or motif that's, you know, worth preserving. And I think Little Jamaica is a really good example. If you look at the buildings, and it's by no means, we don't have the, you know, the beautiful brownstone buildings that you would in Harlem. They're pretty utilitarian, cheaply built buildings. Sometimes they might be concrete block with, you know, a brick front. So from that perspective, you could say heritage, but then maybe not. But when you look at it from how it's used, the relationship between, live work to, working class types of people working there, relationship to the community, black community, and in the broader community, then, you can start to understand heritage beyond just built form, and kind of heritage as, cultural memory, or heritage as employment opportunity. So I think that was like a really critical thing that we noted in Little Jamaica. And then, to the point about aesthetics of gentrification, it's tricky because I think it also that gets into understanding use, because I think sometimes aesthetics can be misplaced, where people say like, I don't like a tall condo, this condo doesn't do anything for me. But is it the aesthetics purely, or is it because there's nothing of value so that you can't, say, access that space? The retail there is too expensive or not for the community. Versus, sometimes you've sort of seen superficial applications where developments do, some kind of motif, or they get an artist, and but beyond sort of a mural, or they do like kind of construction hoarding with like pictures of community faces, but when the development's done, it's not really for the community. So I think, I don't know if I personally have an answer to that. It's kind of a challenging and nuanced question.
Well, it's okay. We have a few more. I see the young lady's hand in the back. Yes.
Okay, one second.
Wait, actually, just 1 second. You're gonna.
All right. Oh, thank you.
Hello?
Hi. Just quickly, Hagia Sophia is a perfect example. We didn't corner the market or have to create all that. I mean, it's been a mosque, it's been a Christian church, it's been a thing. So there are plenty of examples around the world in communities and places where heavily recycled, reused have existed. But that wasn't my question. Okay. So this room and the discussion, beautiful, wonderful. Thank you, Jesus, for letting me be here. I've lived the last 42 years in Iowa, and I did not give birth to all the black people in Iowa, which was a joke for many years I got asked. Oh, I got asked that it's a serious question. I said, no, only 2. And one was born here in Brookline. Anyway, I'm a 5th generation Texan as a native. Lived in Dallas. Yeah. So my maternal grandfather finished Meharry in 1917. And I bring this up for a reason. I'm old enough, I can admit being 70 now, that I don't have to read a book to remember colored only, white only. I saw them, and I went to an all-black elementary school, J.W. Ray on Caddo Street. So I'm not just remembering, I'm remembering it, but I lived it. And I bring it up because the, quote, a word we don't use much anymore, the ghetto, or the designated area where we lived, we've talked about it because there have been a lot of discussions about mostly urban, mostly vertical buildings. But a lot of this country had black people in them who lived in places. I mean, my grandfather used to say, if you live in Texas and you didn't buy land, you missed the point. And he said, and you buy land and you buy it high, because they aren't building any more of it except at a glacial lava post-volcano pace. But that was serious. It was good advice. And I say that because when my grandparents built their home, they deliberately did certain things in terms of design. They built it to look good, to be lush, to show what could happen. And Maynard Jackson, who was the first black mayor of Atlanta, his father was minister at St. John's Baptist Church. My grandfather delivered him. And so people congregated, as people do, along Caddo Street and State Street and some other things. And they built homes that were to be inspirational and aspirational. And I just hope as we discuss this, because I agree, all too often there's an assumption that everything was, tote that barge, lift that bale. And look, I am the last person to suggest that it wasn't hard. It's still hard, and it's gonna be hard for a while. But we also always made joy. We always made and found ways to create beauty in our communities. So I just hope we don't discuss this without realizing that there was an alley behind the house, and so some of the people's houses faced the alley, and some of the people's houses faced the earth. And quite honestly, the people who worked in my grandmother's house lived in houses that faced the alley. And people figured out how to make that, and people respected each other. And so there wasn't this, I won't say it's artificial, but this hierarchical that I'm better than you, because we are all in this. And even though, bless his heart, the brother decided to become a Republican this week, Johnson, who graduated from Harvard in '98 and who's the mayor of Dallas, and this week decided to become a Republican. I don't understand that, but that's another issue. But he did have a good quote. He said, "We may not all be in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm." So the larger context that we are in is also, has not existed. I was trying to, where is Winter? The film I was trying to remember was Taken for a Ride. You know, if you put down on a map all of the 3-digit loops and 495 and 395, I'm not going to be any longer, 495 and 395 in city after city, it is not, nobody, I don't know nobody in this room, but it's not an accident that those went deliberately through. They were designed to destabilize, destroy, and eviscerate black communities. So, you know, all that needs to be in this discussion too, but let's not forget that some folks did, I don't want to just say did well, but they also used their home and their access as a way of creating things. I mean, that's what John S. Johnson understood when he started Ebony Magazine in 1948, to show folks it can be otherwise, and we can do it, and we have done it. So I just want to, don't forget that too. There was a question, sir.
Okay, quickly.
Yeah, this is a quick question. So maybe it's not a quick answer, but it's a quick question.
And just to quickly add, and now when some of those homes have appreciated so much in value, how do we enable people to hold on to their homes? I just wanted to add that.
Stephen.
Yeah, so just sort of following on that sentiment, Jerome. I'm from Cincinnati. Cincinnati is okay, right? Okay, thank you. No, a lot of the projects and the work that you all are engaged in is happening at the nexus of community power and interests, and designers and designer support. That means that there has to be a meeting point. As you reflect on the work that you're doing, how do communities identify design support that can help bolster their interests? And how can designers position themselves to partner with communities? Because that's a meeting that doesn't just naturally happen. So in your reflection, what are some of the ways that we can be positioning ourselves to be a resource?
I'm just going to say, if you guys can, 1 minute responses.
Sure. So one thing is you can look for, there's usually struggles happening around land in communities that are, faced with these issues. And if you identify where those struggles are and go there, you're gonna see the people that are, basically on the front lines, and you can identify ways to support. I can say, like, our Africa Town Planning and Design Committee was pretty much Sarah Zodi, shout out to Sarah Zodi, who teaches here now. She basically just organized a bunch of black architects from where she was working when she was working in Seattle, and kind of just rally folks to come in and get involved, right? And so I think, being that person is valuable because you have proximity to your peers, whether through the AIA or NOMA or, where you work at, and you can bring them to those community efforts, right? And that intersection is very powerful, so I appreciate you lifting that up. And if it's not there and you do create something, really try to root whatever you do create, because that can be an issue too, when something new is created and the community doesn't feel really like that is connected with them. There is like this idea of like black gentrification and things like that too. So I think, making sure that whatever you do, you try to root it with long-standing community members, and there's always those people exist that are doing the work.
Two things really quickly. One, I see our role as architects, especially with some of the community engagement, is really breaking down some of the architectural, urban design, urban planning jargon. So especially, in the Little Jamaica, people often don't know what's a setback, what's a gross floor area, what's overall density mean, or unit types, or things like that, or parking counts. And helping people kind of understand that and kind of speak to their common language as opposed to kind of architectural language. And then I think another thing that we've been advocating as a studio is the importance that architects come to the stage earlier on in the process. Often when architects come to a project, in a lot of ways the project's already cooked, so the site's selected, the performa's already set, they have zoning done, the general density GFA is set, and architects are often just trying to make it work, versus sometimes coming to an earlier stage and helping community members ask the right questions is a role for architecture, or maybe it's a different site to look at to begin with, or there's different requirements, and I think so those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there always need to be more sort of networks and structures, informal and formal, that are helping to bridge those gaps. But maybe even more structurally, I think what I think about on a daily basis is just getting more sort of individuals who represent these communities, who are credible messengers to these communities, who have embodied ways of relating to people, to human beings, through the pipeline of the built environment disciplines. And so there are just more of us out there to begin with. And I think it's also a two-way thing. I think we also need to, just as a larger society, I'm preaching to the choir, kind of expand the image of the architect. When I tell people I'm an architect, even in Harlem, they're still like, "You're an architect?" Because they have a different image in their mind of what an architect is and who an architect is. So I think it's really a two-way thing.
One last thing, I will go work for some of this community organization. I got to shout out our director of real estate, Momar Hermanstein, who's in the crowd, and he took a chance when we were a very, infant organization, and brought his brilliance and years of experience in affordable housing and took a chance on coming to work with us. And since then, now we got 600 units in our pipeline and projects being completed. So I would say consider working with community-based organizations as well at some point, or join the board if you can't work there.
Okay, I think we're at time. Okay, well, I want everyone to thank all of our beautiful and brilliant presenters. Thank you for sharing your time. You guys can continue these conversations throughout the break and into tomorrow. Thank you.